I used to think Christmas was about warmth, about family, gathered around a table, sharing stories, clinking glasses, exchanging laughter. That illusion shattered the night my stepmother opened the door, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You're not welcome here." Then she slammed it shut, right in my face. I stood there on the porch, holding the pie I had baked that morning, the gift-wrapped books I had carefully chosen, and something inside me broke. I wasn't 12 anymore, desperately trying to be accepted. I was 27, with no seat at the table, no place in their hearts. That night didn't just end my Christmas, it ended the last strand of hope I had for belonging. But here's the thing about hitting emotional rock bottom. You either stay shattered, or you rebuild. And me, I chose to rebuild quietly, fiercely. And a decade later, I gave them a reason to regret ever shutting that door. Growing up, I never felt like I truly belonged in my own house. My mum died when I was 8, and my dad remarried within the year. Her name was Marlena Sharp, as crystal, cold as ice. To the outside world, she was elegant, sophisticated, the kind of woman who threw tasteful dinner parties and always knew the right wine to pair with lamb. But to me, she was a daily reminder that I no longer had a mother. She never hit me, never yelled, never even called me names. But her silence, her glances, her carefully curated exclusions, they were weapons more brutal than words. By the time I was 13, it was clear I was the odd one out. My stepsister, Lily Marlene's biological daughter, was the family jewel. Tall, blonde, always wearing designer clothes, and glowing with confidence. She was everything I wasn't. My dad, bless him, didn't notice the subtle differences in how we were treated. Or maybe he did and just didn't want to confront them. He worked long hours, and when he came home, Marlene had already spun the story. "Jane's being distant," she'd say. Or, "She's always sulking, it's hard to reach her." I wasn't sulking. I was surviving. High school only made things worse. I didn't have the newest clothes or the flashiest phone. I worked part-time at the library while Lily got a car for her 16th birthday. My achievements were met with tight-lipped nods. Lily's were framed and hung in the hallway. I remember one specific moment. Senior awards night. I had won a scholarship for a creative writing program, one of only 3 in the entire state. My English teacher cried when she found out. I told Marlene at dinner, expecting maybe, just maybe, a flicker of pride. She didn't look up from her plate. "Creative writing doesn't pay the bills," she muttered. That was the night I stopped trying to impress her. After graduation, I left. No party, no send-off. My dad gave me a check for $500 and said, "Use it wisely, kiddo." Marlene watched from the doorway, arms crossed, Lily leaning into her side like she belonged to something sacred. I walked out with 2 duffel bags and a fire in my chest. I couldn't name yet. It would take me years to understand that fire. Back then, I just called it loneliness. College was tough. I couch surfed for a semester, worked nights at a diner, and studied by flashlight when I couldn't afford electricity. But I kept going. I wrote. I read. I collected rejection letters like war medals, and I kept every single one. Over the years, I tried to keep some contact with my father. Calls on his birthday, holiday cards. Sometimes he'd respond, sometimes he wouldn't. Marlene had fully closed the gate behind me, and I think he let her. There was always a reason. "We're traveling," or "Things are hectic," or simply no reply at all. But I told myself it was okay. I didn't need their validation. I was building a life of my own, however small, however invisible. And yet, no matter how many times I told myself I didn't care, Christmas always stung. Especially that first year I spent alone, eating takeout while scrolling through photos of Lily's perfectly decorated tree. I wanted to believe it didn't matter, but it did. It always did. Until the night they slammed the door in my face. That was the final lesson. The moment everything old and aching inside me turned into something new. Not revenge exactly, not bitterness, just resolve. And the quiet promise I made to myself that night. One day, they'd see exactly who they shut out. After leaving home, I promised myself I'd never need them again. But survival has a way of testing promises. My first apartment was barely livable, a studio above a garage, with paper-thin walls and a toilet that rattled when it flushed. But it was mine. I paid the rent with tips from the diner, kept my books stacked under my bed, and wrote late into the night, with frozen fingers in the winter. I had no mentors, no connections, just hunger real and metaphorical. While Lily was getting internships through her mom's network, I was sending out poems and essays to every publication that accepted unsolicited work. Most got rejected. Some didn't even respond. But I printed every rejection, taped them on the wall, and turned them into a mosaic of almosts. I didn't let myself break. I wrote, and then I wrote more. By 23, I had published my first short story in a small literary magazine. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid me, 25, and gave me a name in the corner of a glossy page. That single line by Jane Holloway meant more to me than my high school diploma. I cried when the issue arrived in the mail. Still, I didn't tell my family. Why would I? They'd called my writing a hobby. They'd sneered at my ambitions. And that memory, that dismissive shrug from Marlene, when I told her about the writing scholarship still, burned in the back of my mind. So I kept building quietly. I started freelancing, ghostwriting blogs, and product copy. Eventually, I landed steady work writing for a growing online lifestyle platform. It wasn't creative writing, but it paid well and allowed me to rent a real apartment, one with a balcony and hot water. By 26, I was a senior editor. By 28, I launched my own digital publication focused on untold stories by women, real stories, unfiltered ones. I called it The Quiet Flame, because that's what I had become: small, steady, and impossible to extinguish. The platform took off faster than I expected. Within a year, we were being featured in women's business journals and mental health podcasts. The email subscriptions doubled every few months. Eventually, venture capital firms started reaching out. One of them, ironically, was run by a college friend of Lily's. She had no idea I was Jane Holloway, the founder. I never used my full name in the bylines, and I never posted personal photos. My story was mine, private, protected. And while Marlene and Lily posted curated Christmas portraits and resort vacations, I was busy quietly scaling something real. At 29, I was invited to speak at a publishing summit in San Diego. My topic? Resilience in narrative. How to build platforms from personal pain. I was the youngest panelist there. When they introduced me, someone in the audience gasped, "She's the one behind the quiet flame?" I smiled. Yes, that was me. I hadn't forgotten the Christmas I ate takeout alone, or the way Lily laughed when Marlene handed her a Cartier bracelet and gave me socks, or the way my father always looked relieved when I said I couldn't come home for the holidays. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted legacy. And slowly, I was building one. Still, part of me wondered, do they ever talk about me? Do they even remember what they said when I left? Do they know who I've become? I got my answer one December evening, 10 years after I walked away. It was Christmas Eve, and I was standing outside their door, invitation in hand, with a gift box in my arms only for it to be slammed shut in my face. I should have known better. The invitation had come via email, 2 weeks before Christmas. Subject line: "Let's make this year different." It was signed by Lily. She wrote about rebuilding bridges, about how life is too short to stay distant. She said Mom missed me, that Dad had been asking how I was doing, and that maybe it was time we had Christmas as a whole family again. The cynic in me rolled her eyes. But another part of me, the part still carrying that teenage ache, wanted to believe it. I hadn't spent a holiday with them in nearly a decade. Every December, I told myself I was fine, that I preferred solitude to judgment. But the truth? I missed the smell of pine and cinnamon. I missed the chaos, even the loud arguments. I missed feeling like I belonged somewhere. So I replied, "Okay, I'll come." I even bought a gift for each of them. Not extravagant, just thoughtful. A vintage poetry anthology for Dad, a handmade scarf from a local artist for Mom, and for Lily, a custom engraved pen that said, "Write your own story." I don't know what made me choose that phrase, but it felt right. I arrived on Christmas Eve. The house looked the same, big, beige, pristine, a giant wreath on the door. I stood on the porch, heart pounding like I was 18 again. I took a breath and rang the bell. Footsteps. The door opened, and there she was. Marlene. Hair perfectly styled, a glass of red wine in one hand. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're here," she said flatly. "Hi, Marlene. Merry Christmas," I offered, forcing warmth into my voice. I lifted the gift box. "I brought something." But before I could finish, she stepped outside and pulled the door halfway closed behind her. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said sharply. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Her expression hardened. "This wasn't supposed to be a drop-in. Lily didn't clear it with us." "I was invited," she said. "She's emotional this time of year," Marlene cut in. "She doesn't always think things through." "It's not the right time, Jane. We're trying to keep things peaceful tonight." "Peaceful? You invited everyone else. Everyone except the ugly disappointment you disowned. Now I show up after being asked and I'm not welcome? That's not fair," she snapped. "This isn't about that." "It's exactly about that." She took a step closer, her voice a hiss. "We have guests, important people, and frankly, you showing up looking like this doesn't help." I froze. "Looking like this?" I glanced down. A navy coat, wool slacks, ankle boots. Simple, elegant, professional. But it wasn't about clothes. It was about me. I was still, in her eyes, the embarrassment, the not quite right daughter, the one who didn't belong in their perfect photo albums. She looked back at the door, then at me. "Please leave, Jane. Don't make a scene." And before I could say another word, she slammed the door. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I stood there for a few seconds, blinking at the wood grain. My breath fogged in the cold air. My fingers clenched tighter around the gift box. I didn't cry. Not then. I turned, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat. The porch light clicked off behind me. And that was it. Christmas with my family. Done in 90 seconds. But what they didn't know was that this door closing it wasn't the end for me. It was the beginning. Because this time, I wasn't leaving in shame. This time, I had power. And it was time they saw exactly what they tried to throw away. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into a nearby overlook where the city lights flickered like a blanket of tiny hopes. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, the wrapped gift box still in the passenger seat beside me. Inside it was everything I had once craved: recognition, belonging, the chance to be let in again. But now, as the silence settled around me like snow, I realized something deeper. I didn't need their approval anymore. What I needed was to stop giving them so much power over me. I unwrapped the box right there in the car, one careful ribbon at a time. I looked at each gift I had picked so intentionally, each one meant to remind them that I remembered, that I still cared. Then I placed each one in a bag, took a deep breath, and drove downtown. There's a women's shelter I volunteer at sometimes just a few hours a month when I can manage it. But that night, I showed up unannounced, gifts in hand. The receptionist raised an eyebrow when she saw me. "Jane? Everything okay? I have a few gifts, I said. Can I leave them for the women and kids here? I think they'd mean more here than where I originally planned. She smiled. Of course! They'll love them. And just like that, the scarf went to a single mom escaping her abuser. The poetry book landed in the hands of a teenage girl who hadn't finished high school but still dreamed of writing. The pen? It found a home with a woman who had just landed her first job after rehab. None of them knew who I was. None of them judged how I looked. None of them slammed a door in my face. Instead, they smiled. They said thank you. And in their eyes, I saw more warmth than I had ever seen across Marlene's dining table. That night, I didn't fall apart. I didn't scroll through Instagram looking at pictures of my perfect family smiling in ugly Christmas sweaters. I didn't drink alone or cry on my couch. Instead, I made hot chocolate. I curled up with a book. I lit a candle and played the jazz playlist Dad used to love before he stopped seeing me as his daughter and started seeing me as a problem to manage. And then I wrote. I opened my laptop and poured everything out the door slam, the humiliation, the ache of wanting something I could never reach. But I didn't write it as a sob story. I wrote it as a beginning. As a reclaiming. I titled the piece Ugly No More. The next day, I sent it to a friend from college who now edited an online magazine about healing and family estrangement. She messaged back within the hour. Jane, this is brilliant. We'd love to publish it. It went live the day after New Year's. I didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. Emails flooded in from strangers across the world, people who had been kicked out, overlooked, unloved, people who thought they were alone until they read my words. They didn't know my stepmom's name. They didn't need to. All they knew was that a girl who had once been left out in the cold now stood in her own warmth. And that warmth? It was enough to light up a room. A week after the article was published, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something curiosity maybe nudged me to swipe. Hello? There was a pause. Then a soft, familiar voice. Jane, it's Dad. My chest tightened. I hadn't heard that voice in over a year. I read the article, he said quietly. Twice. I didn't say anything. I didn't know you felt that way, he continued. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to see it. My voice when it came was steadier than I expected. It was all true. I know. Another pause. Then, I'm sorry. 2 words. Late, but not meaningless. He asked if we could meet. I agreed against every instinct, every scar not to appease him. This time, I wanted clarity, closure. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. He looked older, not just in years but in guilt. He brought flowers. I didn't take them. I need you to know, I said before he could speak, that what you did, what you allowed it, changed me. I know, he said, eyes glossy. And I regret every second of it. We talked for an hour. I let him speak. I asked questions. I didn't flinch when he tried to explain how he thought Marlene just needed to feel secure, how he didn't want to rock the boat. Except I was the one drowning, I said flatly. He nodded. And then he said the one thing I never thought I'd hear. I should have protected you. Those 6 words broke something in me. But they also started to rebuild something else. A foundation not of forgiveness, yet but of honesty. As we left, he asked if he could hug me. I hesitated. And then I let him. Not for him. For me. That night, I wrote again. This time, a second piece. When fathers wake up. I didn't name him either, but I told the truth. About the harm silence causes. About the cost of pretending nothing's wrong to keep appearances. The piece didn't go viral, but it didn't need to. Because something far more shocking happened the next day. I got a call from a producer at a morning show. One of those nationally broadcast segments that focus on real human stories. "We saw your essay," she said, "and we think people need to hear it, especially now. Would you be willing to come on and speak about your experience?" I blinked in disbelief. I guess. Yes. It aired 2 weeks later. I sat under hot studio lights, across from a kind-eyed anchor who asked gentle but pointed questions. How did it feel to be excluded by the people meant to love you the most? How did you find the courage to reclaim your voice? And finally, what would you say to someone watching who feels like the ugly one in their family? I looked into the camera and said, "You're not ugly. You're just surrounded by people who never learned how to see clearly. So let them stay blind. You? Keep shining." Backstage, a producer told me, "We've never had a segment light up our inbox so fast. It didn't make me rich. It didn't fix the past. But it gave me something more powerful. Presence. I was no longer a ghost in the background of my own life. I was Jane, fully seen, fully here." After the morning show aired, I started receiving messages, hundreds of them. From strangers, from old classmates, even from teachers I hadn't spoken to in years. One woman wrote, "I was the Jane in my family. Thank you for speaking when I couldn't." Another said, "Your story made me call my daughter and apologize for not standing up for her." I hadn't realized until that moment how many of us had been walking around carrying the same weight, being the forgotten one, the plain one, the one everyone made the punchline. And somehow, by speaking my story, I had cracked something open for others, and for myself. I decided I wouldn't stop there. So I launched a blog. Nothing fancy, just a clean white background, a photo of me in the corner, and the title, Scene, Stories from the Other Sister. Each week, I posted a short essay, sometimes my own, sometimes stories sent in by others edited with their permission, shared anonymously if needed. And the traffic? It was unbelievable. Thousands of views. Comments from Brazil, Canada, Vietnam, South Africa. Pain, I was learning, had no borders. A month later, I got an email from a local nonprofit focused on self-esteem and emotional healing for teen girls. They were hosting a panel discussion and wanted me to speak. I hesitated. I had told my story, yes, but speaking live? Facing an audience? Then I thought of a 16-year-old girl in the crowd. Maybe sitting in the back. Maybe just needing to hear that she wasn't the only one. So I said yes. On the night of the event, I stood backstage trembling. But when they called my name and I walked out under the lights, I didn't shake. I spoke clearly, calmly, fully present. I told them how I used to believe I was invisible, that nothing I ever did would be enough, that somehow being loved required being beautiful first. And then I told them that wasn't true. The room was silent, and then it erupted in applause, in tears, in a standing ovation that I wasn't ready for but deeply needed. Afterward, a girl maybe 15 came up to me and said, "My stepmom calls me a burden, but hearing you makes me want to speak up too." I hugged her tightly. That night, I went home and cried not from sadness, but from the strange relief of being heard, of being useful. That weekend, I returned to my old neighborhood not to visit my family, but to walk through the places where I used to feel small. The grocery store where my stepmother once told the cashier I wasn't hers. The park where my father promised to show up and never did. The driveway where Marlene once slammed the door in my face on Christmas Eve. I walked past each one, slower now, not bitter, but clear-eyed. Then, impulsively, I drove by the old house. It hadn't changed much, but I had. As I sat in my car, staring at that door that once meant rejection, I smiled. Because now, I knew the truth. I was never the one who didn't belong. They just never made room for anyone who didn't serve their story. And now, I had my own. It was early December when my father called me. The screen lit up with Dad, a name I hadn't seen flash in over a year. I stared at it for a full minute. My hand hovered over the screen. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail instead. His voice was lower, slower. Jane, I know I've done wrong. I want to talk. Please. Marlene's not well, and I think we've got some things to face. I sat in silence. Marlene's not well. Funny how only sickness brings guilt to the surface. Still, something in Mate wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but curiosity, perhaps, told me to go. I didn't tell anyone. On Christmas Eve, exactly 2 years to the day since she slammed that door in my face, I pulled up to the old house once more. The lights were dim this time. The plastic reindeer were gone. No wreath. The house looked tired. Like the people inside it. I stood on the porch for a moment before knocking. My hand trembled, but I didn't hide it. My father opened the door. He looked older. Like life had moved faster for him than for the rest of us. Jane, he said, almost like he couldn't believe I was real. I didn't smile, but I nodded. May I come in? He stepped aside. The living room hadn't changed much. Same couch, same framed photos of everyone but me. I scanned the walls, half expecting to find a clue, a trace, a sign that I hadn't imagined my exile. Nothing. And then, from down the hall, I heard it. Who is it? Came a familiar voice, raspier now, but still sharp. Marlene emerged slowly, in slippers and a robe. Her hair was thin. Her face looked drawn. But when her eyes met mine, something lit behind them. Not quite surprise, not warmth. Something defensive. Well, she said flatly. Look who's back. I exhaled. I didn't come to argue. Then why did you come? Her voice was quieter than I remembered, but still edged. To speak the truth. Once. Clearly. Not for your approval. Not for Dad's. For me. She crossed her arms but didn't respond. I turned to my father. You let her slam the door in my face, I said. 2 years ago. On a night that was supposed to mean family. And you said nothing. You watched me stand in the cold and chose comfort over courage. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Not done. I looked at Marlene. You told me I didn't belong, that I was an embarrassment. You mocked my acne, my clothes, my silence. You whispered to family friends that I would never turn out like your daughter. And yet, I did. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printout an article from a national magazine. From outcast to advocate. Jane Ellison's platform for girls who grew up invisible. I laid it on the coffee table. Marlene's eyes scanned it, flicked upward. I'm not here to rub it in, I said. I'm here because I deserve to stand in this house and be seen. My father lowered his head. I failed you, he whispered. You abandoned me, I corrected. Because it was easier than standing up to her. Because she cried louder. Because I never asked for anything. Tears welled in his eyes. I didn't know how to love you properly. I wasn't hard to love, I said quietly. You just didn't bother to learn how. Marlene said nothing. I turned to her one last time. I don't expect an apology. I don't need it anymore. But I want you to know that I remember every insult. Every moment you made me feel less than, and I turned every one of those scars into stepping stones. She blinked. So you came back to gloat? No, I said, stepping toward the door. I came back to reclaim the space you tried to take from me. Not physically, psychologically. I'm sorry for your illness, I added gently. But your illness doesn't erase the damage. I reached for the doorknob, paused. I don't know if I'll ever come back here again, I said. But I needed this moment. Not as your stepdaughter, as myself. I walked out into the cold. No snow this time. Just a crisp wind and a grey sky. As I reached my car, I felt something shift. I hadn't gone for revenge. I hadn't gone to be loved. I had gone to witness myself standing where I once trembled, speaking where I once stayed silent. When I pulled into my driveway, Ethan was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. "How'd it go?" he asked softly. I climbed the steps and stood beside him. "It didn't end with an apology," I said. But I didn't need one." He nodded and handed me the mug. "Then that's a win." I smiled. A deep, steady, unshakable smile. That Christmas, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of someone else's life. I hosted dinner at my own place. Nothing extravagant, just me, Ethan, our closest friends, and a few girls from the nonprofit I had started mentoring. We cooked together, laughed until we cried, and passed around stories like heirlooms. There were no forced smiles, no quiet jabs masked as jokes, no eggshells underfoot, just belonging. Real, effortless, earned belonging. When we sat down to eat, Ethan raised a glass. "To Jane," he said, "for showing us that being excluded can be the start of building your own kingdom." Everyone clinked their glasses. I blinked back tears. Because he was right. For so long, I'd tried to earn a seat at someone else's table. I twisted myself to fit. I silenced myself to survive. I gave away my voice just to be tolerated. But now I had built my own table, one where no one had to beg to be seen, one where scars didn't need to be hidden, and love wasn't a transaction. I had written my own story page by page, not through perfection, but through presence. Was I still angry sometimes? Sure. Did memories creep in? Of course. But they didn't own me anymore. They were just chapters I'd passed through on my way here. And here was beautiful. Some weeks later, I received a card in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Jane," it read, "you were right. About everything. I don't know if it means much now, but I am sorry. Marlene." I stared at the card for a long time. Then I folded it, tucked it into a drawer, and exhaled. Not because it made things right, but because it confirmed what I had already known. I had healed without her. I didn't need the door reopened. I had built a better one. And I was already through it.